Hope to see you in Chicago for GoFest. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, and this week we'll be talking the playoffs after having 2 weeks of special guests that, honestly, Brian, set the bar so high on this show.
That's true.
Paul, it's funny where, like last week's Jonathan Weiler podcast, we had a professor of, I believe, political studies at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Jonathan Weiler, an amazing subject matter expert on authoritarianism, polarization, all of that. It was an amazing show, but I also understand that, it was very outside of the venue of the normal Boxscore Geeks, even if, I tried to sprinkle in some sports talk, to the point I actually played it for my wife this week. Normally I don't say, hey, do you want to hear me? Do you want to hear me complain about Nikola Jokic? She's like, I don't.
Some good Knicks takes though. So
he had some amazing
fans listen.
But yeah, so we're going to kind of go back to normal, and so we're just going to talk 2 things out of our normal wheelhouse, Brian, the NBA playoffs and Game of Thrones. And then we don't really have last week on Lost because, we didn't have that many comments related to Jonathan Weiler, as I noted. But we even admitted last week what kind of happened is when we recorded last week's podcast, it was very much in the midst of the playoffs starting, but not a lot had happened. So we said, let's wait a little longer. Let's just wait just a little longer to get some takes, and rest assured, we now have some hot takes. And by the way, as noted, we are an official podcast. We have a sponsor, and I have some official copies. So we're going to do a brief word from our sponsor, some last week on Lost, so some comments that we saw on Twitter that we enjoyed, NBA playoffs, then Game of Thrones. So let's get to it. All right. Before we get started, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Sunshower.io. They're a company that creates cloud-based solutions to ensure you aren't overspending on the cloud. Industry experts project that money lost on unused, idle, and over-provisioned cloud computation resources will reach over $14 billion in 2019. That's where Sunshower.io comes in. Sunshower.io's cloud optimization engine sifts through your utilization data to find the best price cloud, the right instance sizes, and clever solutions for perfectly provisioned cloud compute resources. Interested in saving 40 to 80% on your cloud compute bills without sacrificing functionality? Go to sunshower.io/nerd numbers. That lets them know we sent you, and they'll help you out. Thanks so much, and on to the show. And you know what, Brian? My dog Moby, was so excited about hearing the great deals he could have on his cloud computation. He ran into the office. So I don't know if you heard that. That was at the end of that. So you can tell I didn't write that. That's amazing copy from sunshower.io. So definitely give them a check out. I know we have more than a couple of people in our listenership that are interested in cloud solutions. All right, Brian, I just wanted to give these 2 shout outs. Darren Rovell got severely ratioed today. And I just wanted to give a hat tip to 2 great responses. So LSU put up a full page. I guess by default, Brian, all billboards are full page. A full billboard thanking LSU gymnastics for coming in second nationally. And Darren Rovell, being the hater that he is, said, no, you can't put up a billboard for coming in second. And so I wanted to give 2 people a great response to this and then some thoughts as well. So Alex Restrepo did the classic thing, searched through Darren Rovell's tweets. And about 6 years ago, Darren Rovell proudly tweeted out that his story on Joe Flacco was the second most read story on ESPN. So that's a major dunking on Darren Rovell. And then Nicholas Warino, responding to me, so something I said, this is what I'll comment on in a second, said, Jerry West is the most high-profile loser in NBA history, and he is the logo of the league. So I love it. I was saying, Darren Rovell says, no, you can't give a billboard a second place. And I'm like, well, the NBA says we'll just give them finals MVP and make them the logo of the league. And then we kind of had some back and forth pre-show, Brian. I just wanted to get this out there about how sports is a weird world where in sports we have this very, find the best of the best of the best. And as an example, this season we've been discussing Giannis Antetokounmpo versus James Harden for MVP. And my take has been as long as someone is MVP worthy, and so in my opinion, like top 10 in the league qualifies, I don't give a damn who gets the MVP. It's only when players like Derrick Rose or Allen Iverson or in his final year, Michael Jordan get MVP where I get upset, where I go, they had no business being in the MVP discussion, let alone winning the award. But even if I say, and I do think this, by the way, Giannis is the best player in the league this season, hands down, by every conceivable definition you could use for the term most valuable player. Giannis should be your number one vote, unless you're a Denver Nuggets fan, in which case I hope Nikola Jokic gets your number one vote. So if I would basically say, barring being a Denver Nuggets beat writer, Giannis damn well better have your number one vote. Of course, I guess by the same definition, if you're a Houston Rockets beat writer, James Harden has your vote. But anyway, I think that's fine. I don't really care, though, because they're close enough. And then I've kind of said that this weird, we have to find the best of the best of the best, and then everybody else who's second sucks, is just a really weird, bizarre mentality that doesn't exist other places. And in the NBA, I've said we should have more MVP awards. There's no problem spreading the love. If you come in second nationally at an event, getting a billboard is completely fine. The comment I made that inspired Nicholas Farino to write his response was, if you're top 20% in your field in most industries, you're fine. Pre-show, Brian, I was kind of explaining to you that I felt my time at Google, I feel I kind of came out of it with a very Crash Davis attitude. Whatever, mess that up. Attitude. And if you hear me talk about my time at Google and a lot of this stuff.
This is Crash Davis. If you're a younger viewer, that's a character from Bull Durham, right? In like late 80s, early 90s baseball movie. So
right.
I bet there are some people that don't know who Crash Davis is.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. And so the Crash Davis character in Bull Durham is he is a very, very good minor league catcher who is really close to a record for home runs in the minor leagues, who briefly made it to the majors for like 3 weeks and has kind of come out of it, and he's older and jaded and all that. And if you hear me talk about things like Google and software development, I'm similar, except the difference between me and Crash Davis is I basically lasted 2 years at Google and was like, this is too much for me, and I left. But when I left, there is an entire field of software engineering that was like, oh yeah, we'll gladly have you at very similar pay as to what Google would. And, being at Google helped me out. Whereas sports is this field where, if you don't make the NBA at the end of the rainbow, if you don't come in first nationally, if you're an NCAA athlete, people are like, you're a failure. And that is just bizarre to me. So I'm glad Darren Rovell got a little dunked on for that.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing on this before we move on. One thing I was noticing from this original tweet that you linked here, which is, Darren Rovell replying to LSU Gymnastics. Look at the LSU Gymnastics tweet to begin with. I have it up on the screen here, but I'll describe it for the audio-only listeners. It's a photo of the billboard of the team saying National Runner-Up LSU holding the trophy. And then the caption of the LSU Gymnastics Twitter account tweet says, "Thank you, Baton Rouge." So the purpose of the billboard is to thank the community and the fans and the team, for the great year they had and everything they did, right? We couldn't have done it without your support. We're going to need it next year if we're going to go for the championship, right? Seems like all feel good, all that. And he's just like, no, you can't do that. Well, I'm saying just from an operational perspective of a major college program, you need to do stuff like this to help your recruiting. So I don't know.
I'm also going to say, keep that on your mind, Brian, because I'm going to bash a player, but that exact line of thinking applies. And I'll definitely make sure it comes to the forefront of the saying the right thing, et cetera. All right. So here's what we're going to try and do, Brian. I'll try and keep notes, keep up with it. We're just going to go through the playoffs really quick. I'm going to, if we spend too long on any given, I'll kind of push us along. But let's get going. My favorite one, Brian, this is first. Do
we want to read off like the high level of what's going on right now, or you just want to get into all the series? I guess everyone's going to be doing it the same day, right?
This Monday.
Yeah.
The only potential games, and I hope they end by the end of the night with the series being over, is both the Detroit Pistons are fighting for their lives against the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Houston Rockets are hoping to close out the Utah Jazz, and I really hope they close out the Utah Jazz.
Pacers are already done, right? Boston finished it out 4-0 yesterday.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. I guess to you, Brian, because Brian made the list, so we will discuss them like sixth. But we're just going to go through their 8 playoff series, obviously. We're just going to go through series by series, give some high-level thoughts and what we think, and then move on. All right, Golden State Warriors versus Los Angeles Clippers. As of this recording, they're up 3-1. The joke I got to have this week with you, Brian, I texted you and Jeremy and said, oh, man, the Warriors blew a 31-point lead. Kevin Durant's looking upset. This team is in dire straits. everything looks horrible. And the reason this is hilarious, right, is they blew a 31-point lead, yes, and it is the biggest playoff upset in NBA history, I believe, like a comeback.
Biggest comeback, yeah.
Biggest comeback in NBA. And, it's funny, right? The Golden State Warriors, the current core, I would argue, is arguably, sorry to use the word argue twice, is arguably one of the greatest, dynasty squads ever. If we're looking at a mostly similar core over a 5-year stretch, that's
in the modern era.
In the not even modern. I'm gonna get myself in trouble there, Brian. But yeah, fuck the Boston Celtics of the '60s. I'd still take this.
It was an 8-team league or whatever, right?
That's my point. It's just like, yeah, and I don't know if they still had it this way, but so as a history of the NBA, there used to be 8 teams, right? Then when it finally got up to like 20 plus teams, it got to 23 initially after the ABA merger. They used to give a bye in the first round of the playoffs to the number 1 seed. And then they used to have a best of 5 series for the first round of the playoffs. And then now we're at the modern 4 rounds, best of 7 each round. So when you're looking at a squad like the Golden State Warriors, who, have made 4 straight finals, coming away with 3 of them, that is so much more impressive than any of the teams. Yeah, like you're saying, back in the day where it's like you played like 6 games to decide if you won a title against much weaker competition. It is not the same, especially since like leagues back in the 60s, you didn't even have free agency, let alone restricted free agency. So
drinking beers and smoking cigarettes at halftime, stuff like that.
Exactly. So all I was going to say about this is, this team is one of the most impressive ever, but they also have the auspicious honor of giving up some of the most impressive upsets. So obviously blowing the 3-1 lead in the NBA Finals to Cleveland a few years ago.
By the way, the record in that series is 3-1 right now, so you know what we're going to hear for the next few days.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And then giving up the biggest upset. So, they're one of the most impressive teams, and they've also got some of the most impressive loss honors, which is funny. So after they were 1-1, though, of course, what happens? They come back. They convincingly win their next 2 games, and they convincingly win their next 2 games behind the amazing play of Kevin Durant. So I just found that amusing. And all I'll kind of say on this series is Kevin Durant's amazing. This is a really good squad. And the only kind of note I'll have for the Clippers, which really kind of pains me, is it really, really sucks how bad Danilo Gallinari has been playing, because he was one of the feel-good stories of the year. Danilo Gallinari looked really great for the Clippers in the regular season. We loved his regular season numbers. And then in the playoffs, I've been looking over these numbers. He has put up some of the worst games of the playoffs, Brian. So that's kind of the only shame to me, is how bad Danilo Gallinari is playing. As an example, the last game where they dropped to that 3-1 and were only down by 10 at the end, went 5 for 20, 16 points on 20 shots. Oof. Montrezl Harrell still looks good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a good squad, and it's just a shame Danilo's not playing well. Although to the same boat as, say, I would give the Detroit Pistons, who may or may not be trying to close out tonight. Sorry, my eye kind of itches. The Golden State Warriors are just a really good team.
Yeah, and I think that's the theme with most of these series, and one that, was in that write-up you did pre-playoffs for our thoughts on it, was there are some one-sided series here on paper in terms of talent, right? And that seems to be coming true in most of these cases. But we'll stick to this game. This is definitely true, right? The 1 versus the 8 seed, on paper, the only series which should be more one-sided was, Detroit versus Milwaukee, which has been. But this series, we did, outside of that big comeback game, it's been a very one-sided series. And we can just scroll down to some of the basic stats here. We've got this basketball reference page open for this series. And, yeah, I mean, right off the bat, 58.6% effective field goals for the Warriors and 50.3% for the Clippers, and 8.3% shooting delta, which has led to, a big difference in O rating and D rating. That's just, Clippers are getting destroyed.
Both averaging over 70% true shooting is absurd. Let's list the last thing that's really important to talk about this series. I get to say Brian was right for now, although this came back to bite you before. Andrew Bogut is playing amazingly well.
Yeah.
That being said, he is basically limited to about 20 minutes a game.
Yep. He fouled out of the last game even.
And so on the one hand, that's rough, but the other thing, don't forget, when the Warriors gave up that 3-1 lead, what happened is Andrew Bogut got injured mid-series and was gone for the rest of the series. That definitely cost them. And the Warriors have lost DeMarcus Cousins, obviously, for the playoffs. He wasn't playing that great before he went down, but, that does lead a question as to, I think you were saying the Warriors have like half a center basically now, and we're just going to have to see how it plays out through the rest of the playoffs.
Yeah, my math on that is, so what they're doing now is they're starting Bogut at center in place of Cousins, who's hurt. And then Looney's basically the backup. He's the full-time backup center now. But the reason I say half is because Bogut can only play half the minutes. And Looney is not, we've talked about this before. He's played a lot of center, but I'd argue he really has the body of a forward. He's not big compared to a lot of bigger players. It's not as big a deal against the Clippers, really. The Clippers have Zubats, who's pretty big, but other than him, they don't play a lot of big players. So if Looney can go up against Harrell, that's fine for him. So they'll be okay in this series, but I think in future series, I might be a little more worried about that. So, and here's the thing. I think a lot of the sharp sort of opinion is that losing Cousins doesn't matter that much, and I kind of agree with that. He wasn't playing that well. But he is a loss of depth. So if now someone else gets hurt, Bogut or Looney mainly, or say Draymond Green for that matter, he plays center as well, the Warriors will have some issues if they lose one more of those guys. So, I mean, there's not much they could have done roster,
To be a jerk, by the way, on several fronts, both on the We Told You So, with how well JaVale McGee closed out the end of the season for the Lakers.
Great year.
Bullshit if you think DeMarcus Cousins was better than JaVale McGee would have been for the Warriors. That's my first take. Second off, to all the people that were like, when DeMarcus Cousins signed with the Warriors and were like, it's over, tear it up. We all thought it was ridiculous just from the perspective of who knows how good he's going to come back. And don't forget, it took him a while to come back and he was fine, but he wasn't as dominant as we've seen him. And then also it's not, we're not saying we predicted this, but every year in the NBA, we know injuries happen and all sorts of weirdness happens. So the people that were saying the NBA is a foregone conclusion, why do we even watch? The West was the most competitive it's been in years this season. So I found it very amusing that when people were like, it's all over, they weren't talking about the Bucks out east for what it's worth. They were talking about the Warriors out west, and that didn't come to pass. So I do enjoy that a little. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, last thing on the... No, sorry. We got a lot of stuff. Let's move on, Dre. Let's keep going.
I was going to say, this next one we can kind of just go maybe quick high level, because I did write a piece on Donovan Mitchell, so that'll give us more time to talk about Houston versus Utah. But the Utah Jazz are in a big hole, and there are a few things I would note about this series that we kind of did discuss pre-show, or pre-playoffs. One was there's a very real discussion about what the series was going to look like and who was going to get play, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that's rough is with Derek Favors and Rudy Gobert, the Warriors are a significantly better front court. Utah, sorry.
You
Warriors.
Just made me have a dream right there. Wow. Favors and Gobert and the Warriors front court.
Gobert on the Warriors, then you move Draymond Green down to the 3. That'd be spicy.
I think they could go for Favors in the offseason because he's the odd man out. But anyway, keep going, Dre.
They should give that a try. Okay, but anyway, with that front court, they should have really had an edge. And that is to a degree true, except one of the things is they're still giving major minutes, at least 21 minutes a game to Jae Crowder. And we kind of noted this before. So just as a note, minutes played, Jae Crowder 63, Derek Favors 61. If it was 80-40, that's a little better. And then not only that, the rough part is Jae Crowder is playing terribly. Jae Crowder shooting 19% from the field, 20% from 3. And, this really pained me, but I kind of did just say, we love Jae Crowder on Dallas. We loved him on Boston. I don't know if it's injury. I don't know if it's system. He is not working out in Utah. He should not be getting more minutes than Derek Favors.
It's a big enough sample size now, right, Dre? We've seen him quite a bit.
Exactly. And I mean, you've been saying this all year where you've basically been like, Derek Favors. So when they go into the playoffs, we're like, you have an edge with Derek Favors. If you play Derek Favors, you look great. And as an example, PJ Tucker's at 102 minutes versus, as we noted, Derek Favors at 61. PJ Tucker's been looking great, and I'd argue part of that is just bad matchups. So, the Rockets are not, giving the minutes they should be giving to Kenneth Faried, which is what we'd argue, but it's not mattering because the Utah Jazz are giving too many minutes to suboptimal players. And then, of course, the fun one, Brian, that I did get to write a piece on is Donovan Mitchell is just playing horribly. He has so far the worst game in the playoffs.
Should we just do the piece now, or do you want to come back to it at the end?
Hey, why don't we just do the piece now?
Let's
and then
just do it now.
I don't have to worry about it. Yeah, so what I noted about Donovan Mitchell, I had two interesting comparisons. The players being future MVPs, Derrick Rose and Michael Jordan, or past MVPs, I guess. Because everybody was comparing Donovan Mitchell to Michael Jordan last season, because if you did some weird back-of-the-napkin math using his usage and his points per game, he looked like Michael Jordan. Now, all you had to leave out was
literally the two worst stats, right, Dre?
Well, it's not the worst stat, but what we've said about both usage and points per game is that on their own, they don't tell you anything.
Right.
You need context for both of those numbers, which is why they're bad numbers, because most people just treat both of them as bigger equals good. And we go, you really need more context to know what bigger means for either of those numbers. And in Donovan Mitchell's case, that's the funny part. If you are a below average shooter in the NBA, more shots equal bad. If you are, a below average shooter in the NBA, I'd say like Rajon Rondo is one of our favorite examples, who's kind of a low dog. I don't even know. My dog really wants to keep me company this podcast. But if you're a below average shooter like Rajon Rondo, but you don't take a ton of shots and you pass really well and rebound really well and defend really well, it's more than fine. So that's kind of our point on Donovan Mitchell and comparing him to Michael Jordan. He's a bad shooter. Michael Jordan was a good shooter. There's an old Simpsons joke way back in the day. So, very much like Pratt, might be really close to Bull Durham and Release, but where Montgomery Burns wants a movie made of him. And he says, I want someone like Spielberg to direct it and make it like Schindler's List. He's like, the only difference between me and Schindler is, we both made munitions for the Nazis in World War II, only my bullets worked. So it's very similar there. That's really bad. I'm going to take that back. You don't deserve that much harsh treatment, Donovan Mitchell. But the point being, there's a very real difference between Michael Jordan and Donovan Mitchell's 25.
Hans Moleman got robbed in the voting, if I remember right, for Best Picture. But anyway.
It was like a film festival episode. And that was actually, I believe it was a crossover with the critics. So we are just putting pop culture in the 90s that's way outdated. But yeah, Donovan Mitchell is really killing that team with poor shooting. So that's going on. And then what's even funny is, admittedly, James Harden started this series pretty decent. I think he went like 3 quarters without scoring a shot, and his true shooting percentage is horrendous. So this series is kind of amusing because James Harden isn't killing the Jazz. The Jazz are really killing the Jazz. And I kind of mentioned in this piece, I kind of made it self-biographical where I was noting I bashed Donovan Mitchell last season, and I had a bunch of vitriol from what made it more interesting, Brian, is I'm used to vitriol from fans, but this was vitriol from like mainstream Utah Jazz bloggers, which is weird. And to the point of, there were some, I think there was a Nylon Calculus blogger that primarily covered the Jazz, and I think a Sports Illustrated one that I ended up blocking, or they blocked me, one of the two, because it just got, I was being, I think, as I mentioned in the piece, I had people saying Nerd Numbers is this guy who's just obsessed with hating Donovan Mitchell, and all he does is tweet about Donovan Mitchell. And the people that would say this, one, were Utah Jazz bloggers. So I'm like, you blog about the Jazz, like you're really yelling at me about this. And then the second being, they'd be like, Donovan Mitchell fan 1, 2, 3, 4, and they don't follow me. And so it was very weird to have people yelling that at me. And even if I was obsessed with Donovan Mitchell, who gives a damn? We're all sports fans. Like, that's really throwing, as I mentioned, I think the metaphor I used in my piece, Brian, as I said, that was like using a catapult to throw boulders out of your glass castle. But the simple point was Donovan Mitchell was below average. And a lot of the vitriol I had is he's young. No one's done things like this. He's going to improve. And this season he got worse, and it's now arguably knocking the Jazz out of the playoffs. So I was like, you know what? I kind of left Donovan Mitchell alone for this season, in part because when he himself started responding to what I was saying, it gets very interesting. You're like, oh, you're talking about people. Second, as I noted in my piece this time, and as I've said, I think 1 billion times on the show, Brian, his job is to get paid. And in the NBA, to get paid, you have to get the right type of stats, and those aren't going to be the stats that make the stat heads happy, right? It was the same in Moneyball. The whole story in Moneyball is there are these players that are really good at drawing walks, and their team would get mad at them. I believe Hatteberg in the book, not in the movie, but in the book he said he had a hitting coach that said, we've tracked your numbers, and you get on base like 60%. You get a hit 60% of the time when you swing at the first pitch. Why aren't you swinging at more first pitches?
And that made Bean like him, though, right? Instead of not like him.
Because his was, I only swing at first pitches when it's a really obvious first pitch. The right maneuver is to not swing at the first pitch. I'm trying to get on base, which is good to help the team, but I've got hitting coaches that are mad at me because I'm not swinging away, because I'm getting a walk instead of a hit, and that's the better play. And so it's the same thing in the NBA. I've been noticing, I didn't read the piece, Brian, so I broke my own rule, but I'm still going to bash it, so apologies. But it's easy. I'm noticing Nate Silver going a little more out of vogue this election cycle, Brian. I'm loving it because I have Schadenfreude. But
that's right. We're already in the 2020 election cycle, aren't we?
There was a piece that 538 came out with about how Russell Westbrook's rebounds are hollow because he's stealing rebounds from his team.
Oh my God.
And what was just amusing to me about this is, let's say Russell Westbrook is stealing rebounds, and actually friend of the show, Ty Willinghans, has looked at some of the contested versus uncontested rebound numbers and says, of the players in the NBA that there's a real skew, Russell Westbrook is really the only one where it really does skew in his favor, if that makes any sense. Meaning on uncontested rebounds, he gets way more than he really should. And for what it's worth, this is built into the wins produced formula. In the wins produced formula for defensive rebounds, we do say if a player has a higher rebound rate on defensive rebounds in their team, we penalize their production. We basically say half of those rebounds should have gone to your teammate, so we throw them back. And even with those numbers, let's take a look this year, because I believe he actually did kind of go downhill relatively, but it's for a different reason. So Russell Westbrook, we still like this season, but not at his peak levels. But even that being said, Russell Westbrook averaging a triple-double is worth so much to his brand and his money-making potential that when you go, this player is stealing rebounds, first off, I go, if you're going to be that worried about a player stealing rebounds, where the fuck are you in terms of players like Donovan Mitchell taking too many shots, stealing shots? That's my first question. And for what it's worth, with Russell Westbrook this season, that's our complaint with him. Russell Westbrook, when he won MVP in 2017, was a league average shooter. So we said there is no problem with how many shots you're taking, and you do enough other good stuff well, assists and rebound, possibly defend, that we have no problem with it. The last two seasons, 2018 and 2019, our complaint has legitimately been Russell Westbrook has forgotten how to shoot. And in this playoff series, Russell Westbrook is shooting like garbage. So of the things I'm going to complain about with Russell Westbrook, it's his shooting efficiency, much like Donovan Mitchell, not him stealing rebounds. But even if he's stealing rebounds, you go, that's his job. He's trying to get paid. You saying you're padding your stats, whatever, he can raise his hand. And one of my favorite players, former Warrior David Lee, who does have a ring with the Warriors, Brian, mentioned that when he was averaging 20-10 and Kirk Goldsberry came after him at Sloan saying he was a horrible defender, he basically noted, I'm putting up the stats that you want. So, and I mean, an easy follow-up he could say is like, if you don't want me to do that and you want me to focus on D, then effing pay for it. And you don't. And the classic example with the Utah Jazz we have is Rudy Gobert versus Donovan Mitchell. Rudy Gobert got Rookie of the Year consideration, came in second behind Ben Simmons. Rudy Gobert, despite being like a defensive player of the year, an amazing player, didn't make the All-Star game this season. So it's obvious what they pay for. So it always gets amusing when you start bashing players for that. And so I try, like I said, I tried to be a little more careful with Donovan Mitchell this season, but he's played bad enough in this playoffs. I wanted to bash him, and that's all really I had. And then the second one, this was just weird. And I feel really weird coming out against him because I really liked what Kyle Korver said in the Players Tribune recently about Thabo Sefolosha. And what he noted was that he had white privilege. And I know the term white privilege makes a lot of white people bristle, but as I noted, you've got a fucking white supremacist in the White House. You won. So I'm kind of sick of I'm sick of worrying about the feelings. Like the people calling the snowflake generation, it's like, if you're going to call people snowflakes, like, deal with the second hand.
We control the presidency and all the houses of Congress and all these judges, Dre, but we're the victims.
Exactly. Because I've lost my patience over the last couple of years of the kid gloves there. So if the term white privilege makes you bristle, fucking sorry. Like there was a King of the Hill, another, to keep ourselves in outdated pop culture references. There's a King of the Hill episode where the concept of sexism came up. And he said, I think Hank Hill said something like, they got the short end of the stick. It's called a double standard, take advantage of it. So he basically acknowledges, what I loved about that episode is like, he acknowledged, he's like, yeah, men get more advantage in this scenario. I forget what it was in the episode. He's like, just own it. And it's the same with like white privilege. It's like, you can just enjoy that you have it and know that it's not going to go anywhere for a while, even if it gets worse, right? It's like you have a 100-point lead. It might go down to 50. You still have a 50-point lead. Just F and own it. So Kyle Korver did a great article in the Players Tribune about this, where there was some police profiling and brutality against a teammate of his, Cephalosha. And he kind of said at the time, despite being good friends with Cephalosha, he didn't even really acknowledge or realize it. You see this a lot with people, someone gets in trouble with the police and, Black Lives Matter goes on Twitter and says this happened, and people go, well, what were they doing wrong, et cetera, instead of saying, hey, maybe there's a double standard here and maybe we should examine it. So that was a great piece from Kyle Korver, which I love.
We also just say what happened for people that might have forgot or not heard. Cephalosha was just like standing around with one of his friends, and some cop came up there and hit him in the leg. And he missed like all kinds of time, right? Like he missed a full playoffs or most of a season.
Arguably this so the Atlanta Hawks were the number 1 seed a few years ago.
Yeah, Korver and Cephalosha were both there.
Korver and Cephalosha, this was a funny take that aged horribly because it was an outlier season. Kyle Korver had one of the most ridiculous shooting seasons ever in NBA history. Yeah. And if you told me he did roids that season, I wouldn't doubt it. It's very much like Barry Bonds, where Kyle Korver's a great player. We loved him his entire career.
Still playing pretty well.
Like, holy cow, what the hell happened? And he goes back to normal. So like that season, but they lose out in the playoffs, and they were missing Cephalosha, who we argued at the time was a very good role player. We would call him just a very good player. So that happened, and Kyle Korver's admission was, this all happened. He was a good friend, but he still didn't even kind of give it the same consideration that he did in the Players Tribune piece. So just to say, there might be a system that is more skewed to favor him, a white basketball player, than his teammate, which we love. So I wanted to get all the love for Kyle Korver out because, and now I'm even going to side with the player I don't like, which is Derrick Rose. As I mentioned, I'm fine never giving an accolade ever again to Derrick Rose, even if we accept him back in the NBA because of his rape case and all that, which is, we as you mentioned already, Brian, we have too much to go. But Kyle Korver came out defending Donovan Mitchell because Donovan Mitchell missed a game-tying 3 in that game, as we mentioned, where they went down to basically an insurmountable hole. They're in an 0-3 hole. So he came out in defense and said he's one of the best young players I've had that takes all the shots and shoulders the team. He's one of the best players I've ever seen do this in my career. And the only thing that stuck out in my head, and then I went and looked it up, is he played with Derrick Rose when Derrick Rose won MVP at the same age as Donovan Mitchell. And the reason this pissed me off, because I also compared Donovan Mitchell to Michael Jordan, as I already mentioned, is at age 22, Michael Jordan puts up 63 points, at the time a playoff record. I think it's still a playoff record. I might be wrong. Against the number 1 defense Boston Celtics. And at the end of the game, Larry Bird, one of the all-time greats in NBA history, goes, Michael Jordan is God in disguise. And for what it's worth, the Celtics go on to win that finals. I think Larry Bird, that was the year he won finals MVP. Okay, so that happens. So that's at age 22. Derrick Rose, age 22, wins the MVP and takes his team to the conference final. So when Kyle Korver's like, this young player, I haven't seen it. It's like, yes, you yourself have, which is what amused me. As you noted at the very, very beginning of the show when we're talking LSU, there is politics, the right thing to say. Obviously, Kyle Korver is not going to come out to the press and say, you know what? I've played with some great players who at the same age as Donovan Mitchell were much more developed and better players. And if we had those players on the team, we'd probably be up 2-1 in this series. Obviously, he can't say that. So we've got to keep that with a grain of salt. But all I wanted to say about Donovan Mitchell here is, like, I kind of bit my tongue for the whole season, as I mentioned. We're at the point where we can say there have been players in the past that have played better at the same age. I'm not saying Donovan Mitchell will not become a productive NBA player, but can we at least admit now he was not good enough to be the starting guard for the Utah Jazz these last 2 seasons, and they have gotten shellacked by the Houston Rockets in the NBA playoffs, where Donovan Mitchell has put up horrible games. And that's what I got.
Yeah, I love how you put that. I kind of see it from 2 different lenses, right? The insider perspective. Donovan Mitchell comes out. Well, yeah, so Kyle Korver is going to, compliment all of his teammates, right? Cephalosha, Mitchell. Well, he's still in the league in his mid-30s. So this is something we talked about before, right? If you can make enough people like you, you can stick around for a while. I'm not saying Korver doesn't deserve it anymore. He's still a really good player, and I'd probably want him on my team. But this is part of the reason why, right? He could hang around another 3 years if he wants. So smart on his move. And, of course, for Mitchell, everyone, no matter what happens in this series, he's going to come out of it probably with a max contract in the next couple of years, unless he gets hurt. So he's saying and doing all the right things, and he's saying and doing everything people want him to say, right? He's the leader of the team, so he's supposed to take responsibility when he plays bad, and so he is, so people like that, and that's great. He's doing everything from his perspective. But from the outsider's perspective, you're right. The Utah Jazz are one of the best defensive teams in the league and best rebounding teams. Maybe that's because of Mitchell, but maybe it's more because of Gobert, Favors, and players like that. And they're terrible on offense, so that's why they're losing. And he's taken the most shots, I'm pretty sure, by a big margin for the Jazz. And the Jazz cannot score any points at all. And this series, I thought, would be a lot closer. Who knows? Maybe it still will be. They'll complete the reverse sweep, Dre, and Donovan Mitchell will score 50 points every game and prove us wrong. That could still technically happen, but yeah, right now it looks like he's playing the way he does in the regular season, which is not that great yet. So keep doing what you're doing, Donovan Mitchell, but Utah Jazz, you're not going to win when he's doing that.
In my piece, that's what I said. My frustration is that a player taking 20 shots a game is basically you're not allowed to attack that, no matter what they do, no matter how poorly they shoot. Even Russell Westbrook, where we're fine. So it's funny where we used to think Russell Westbrook was overrated, and people were like, "You're crazy." And then we're finally then the world said Russell Westbrook's an MVP, and we said we agree. And then we said then the next season people were like, Russell Westbrook's overrated. We're like, no, he's MVP worthy. That was very bizarre. But the point is, with Russell Westbrook right now, our argument is he's shooting too much and he's not good at it. But the people have turned on Russell Westbrook. What they're saying is he's rebounding too much. We're like,
that's the wisdom of the crowd versus counting, basically, right? We're counting, and they're the wisdom of the crowd. Both are pretty good, but I think we're better.
But all I'm saying is it bugs me to a high degree that insulting a high usage player for chucking is still basically undoable in the NBA. If you do get attacked, even a role player like Kyle Korver knows to stand up for that player. And my comparison basically is, I don't know what's going on there. Basically, even a role player like Kyle Korver recognizes that instead of saying, what the fuck is he doing shooting so much? Why is he shooting so much? Stop shooting. He has to say, I'm really impressed with how he's shouldering this load. And it's just very, very frustrating, Brian. And as I noted at the end of my piece, until we change our thinking, that's not going to turn around. Okay.
It's just so simple, Dre, just to put the end of this. Mitchell takes all the shots for the Jazz, and they're terrible on offense. It's not much more complicated than that.
Okay. So the next one I've got, and sorry, there's all sorts of stuff going on. I think it's thundering outside. My wife's on the phone, so apologies for seeming a little distracted. Let's go for the next series.
Oklahoma City Thunder? No, just kidding.
We just talked that actually with Russell Westbrook stuff. Lillard's playing really well. I'll give him that. Russell Westbrook is just not shooting very well. That's all I really got for this, Brian. And this is just one of those days, Brian, where my dog is, I think it's thundering, so my dog is freaking out and coming to the office.
Yeah, dogs don't like thunder.
Apologies for all of that. And then I did say we wanted to keep this short. We've already gone pretty long, and I want to give the next series. So any thoughts on Portland OKC?
Yeah, Westbrook is definitely back to the old Westbrook now, like you were saying. He's still getting a ton of rebounds and stuff like that, but he's not shooting as well as he used to. Although not tragically bad. He's better than Mitchell probably. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's what we said before the series is basically happening. That Schroeder is getting too big of a role. Westbrook's been worse than the regular season. not like he was during his MVP. George has been missing a lot of shots too. He has not been playing like the regular season. He is 30 for 81. That's not very good. Steven Adams looks fine, but he's not shooting a lot. And a lot of their other players don't really matter that much. I noticed Noel's been getting a little bit of run and been pretty good, but still not enough minutes. I think Portland is just playing really well right now. And, as much as I want to say things are going to change and they'll regress, they were just a much better team than Oklahoma City this year. They're up 3-1, I think, and looks like they're going to close it out.
I think the last couple of games, not as much, but one piece of credit I want to give you. You said this preseason, so I want you to be able to take a victory lap.
Always.
Is we noted losing Jusuf Nurkic really hurt. We thought he did great this season. And you kind of said them picking up Enes Kanter really offset that. And to our point about value, Enes Kanter, I believe in these playoffs, is doing really, really well at rebounding. That's a really important skill. So, his shooting, I think, has been kind of up and down. But, yeah, Enes Kanter is averaging 13.3
points.
He's
21 out of 38 shots, so he's doing okay in the playoffs.
He's shooting well. He's got the fifth highest minutes. He's a starter. But,
most rebounds on the team.
He's rebounding really well. He's doing really well for that team. So, essentially, under normal circumstances, losing Jusuf Nurkic really should have killed him. And they got lucky to pick up Enes Kanter. So if you're an OKC fan that is really upset, blame the New York New York Knicks. Sorry, it's baseball season, Brian. Blame the Knicks for all that. Okay, let's go on to the next. This one. So, Brian, I'm going to bring back another reference, this time from the 80s. So Miracle on Ice.
Oh, good times.
So, no, this is when the United States upset the USSR in Olympic hockey to go on to win the gold medal. But what people don't know is they won in the medal round, but they actually had one more game to play. And I believe it was Sweden, and I think they were actually down 2-1 heading to the third quarter.
It's just that Soviet Union was the biggest favorite in the whole field by far. So they were not expected to lose to USA.
They lost to USA, and basically as long as the USA got a win or a draw in their next round, they get gold. But if they got a loss, the Soviets with a better record could have gotten the gold medal still with a win, which they did get. So the point being, the United States had a shot at the gold, was down 2-1 in their last game, and Herb Brooks said, if you blow this shot, you'll take it to your fucking grave.
He was the coach of USA, right?
Herb Brooks is the coach of Team USA. He's well known for a popular speech. You can find it on YouTube pretty easily with Kurt Russell. Great moments are born of opportunity. It's amazing. It's a great speech, but arguably his second most inspirational speech is, if you blow this, you'll take it to your fucking...
What's the name of that movie? Is it Lake Placid, or is that different?
It's great. I love it with Kurt Russell as Herb Brooks. So you check it out if you haven't. But what I was going to say is the Denver Nuggets arguably should be in a 3-0 hole against, or arguably should be washed out. Sorry, not in a 3-0 hole.
Series is 2-2 right now.
It's 2-2. The Denver Nuggets managed to have an amazing comeback with Jamal Murray, where he scored like 24 points in a quarter for them to make a comeback win in game 2. And then they were down like 15 points in the first quarter, Brian. It looked like it was over. And Nikola Jokic, almost averaged a triple-double in the first half for the Nuggets to come back and win. They are primed to win this series, and if they blow it, Brian, it's fucking grave is all I can think. That's like that same quote. It's like, you're not like, I can't believe the San Antonio Spurs almost upset him again. As a Denver Nuggets fan, I was getting flashbacks to the big three, Manu, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, back in the day when they were winning finals every other season. Those three knocked the Nuggets were one of their regular, first round fodder opponents. And I was just having flashbacks to that because I was saying, as a Nuggets fan, they're the number 2 seed. I wrote pre-playoffs that they had the luckiest draw in that, arguably on paper, they are like the 4th best seed. They are the 4th best team out west, right? I believe the Golden State Warriors, Houston Rockets, Utah Jazz are all better teams on paper. But because of how the Nuggets draw came out, they were assured not to have to face any of those teams until the conference finals, which is just an amazingly luck of the draw. And then they were like almost in a 3-1 hole in the first round. I was like, oh God, oh God, oh God. they're primed, Brian. We can do it. We can make the finals this year. There's a shot, Nuggets. Don't blow it. That's all I have to say about this series. And then, of course, the only kind of bummer is Will Barton is really bumming me out. He just is not playing like himself. He was injured most of the season, isn't playing well. F&A, Jamal Murray looks great, and Nikola Jokic looks great. That's what I got in this series. Oh, and also, apologies to be this mean. I got to give a shot. Is it Derek White on the Spurs?
Oh, yeah.
Is that? Am I getting the right one?
Derek White, I think so. Yeah, he is on the Spurs.
Yeah, here's what I want to say. Fuck Derek White. Where did he come from? Because Derek White is playing amazingly well for the Spurs. You know, the easy answer, I'm going to use like a Jeff Van Gundyism, which is usually the team with the best player wins. That is usually not a bad metric in the playoffs. And so Derek White in the regular season this year was playing 25.8 minutes per game, averaging 9.9 points, 3.7 rebounds. It's hopped down to his playoffs. In the playoffs, way down there, 19.3 points per game, put up one of the best games of the series so far. So
64% shooting.
Derek White,
19 points.
Derek White is pulling a Marcus Camby on us, and that's not fair. So fuck.
He's only 24.
And come on, Nuggets, we can do it. We can do it.
Yeah, and even Pirtle doesn't look that bad either for San Antonio. I think your early comment on this series is right. It does look like San Antonio is kind of kicking their ass if you look at things like point margin and shooting and all that. So they're kind of lucky to be 2-2 right now, especially considering, they gave up that game at home, which was rough. But the one thing I'll say, so first of all, Jokic is just ridiculous. You pointed that out. He's really carrying them. Murray had that one really crazy stretch that he pulled them back into that one game. His overall shooting is not great though. So he's picking it up, but he was kind of, not doing as well early on. So yeah, they are going to need some help there. I'm not too worried though. They were better than the Spurs in the regular season. So if they've gotten through this bad play early on, they should get better and win. One thing I'll say though is 92.4 is the pace for this series. That's probably where San Antonio wants it, not Denver. Denver's better team, used to playing at altitude, has younger players. They probably want to have a faster pace than that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Okay, let's get on. Milwaukee versus Detroit. Here's going to be a shocker to you, Brian. Milwaukee's a really good team. Detroit, nowhere close, and they were missing. Even if we didn't think Blake Griffin, I think we thought he was a slightly below average big this season. Missing Blake Griffin still hurt.
Although one thing I'll say about him, he was probably victimized by our positions this season. He probably would have been better compared to other power forwards.
He would have been a slightly, as we've noted, I never got around to fixing us in the regular season.
Brian. Season's over. It's fine.
But yeah, I was going to say, we basically noted that we thought we should go back to the old method of position adjustment. The wins produced formula does a position adjustment where they compare against league average at each position: point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward, center. A few years ago, I thought, brilliant thought, you do wing and big, so shooting guard, small forward are one, power forward and big and center are another. And we've just kind of decided
the league changed a lot since then, I would say.
What we basically say is Blake Griffin would be a slightly above average power forward by that metric, where he's a slightly below average big, but that's because he's getting compared to centers. On a team with Andre Drummond, there is no way in hell anybody by any reasonable stretch of the imagination considers him a center. But what I'll say is one thing that was interesting to me, I don't know if this is still true. I believe so far, Giannis has not been the best Bucks player in any given game that they've won in the three. I think it's been like Pat Connaughton, Sterling Brown, and maybe one other. And then, I was kind of upset that Andre Drummond was kind of getting eviscerated for the poor playoffs because, one, they're mixing Blake Griffin, and two, the Bucks are the best team in the league by far. So, the Pistons are supposed to lose this series. I don't think it's an indicative of anything against Andre Drummond. And we'll just have to see how the Bucks play in the next series. But I think they are. It'll be interesting because the next round I think they go up against the 76ers if everything goes as planned, or the Celtics. It might be the Celtics, right?
Yeah, let's go over to it is the 4-5 game they'll be up against next, and the Celtics have already advanced, so it's going to be Bucks versus Celtics almost for sure. And the reason we say almost for sure is like you said, the numbers in this series have been so one-sided, Dre. Let me see if I can find this again. Here we go. Again, like 57.5% effective field goals. So, threes converted plus twos, not including free throws. 57.5 for the Bucks. 43.4 for Detroit, Dre. That's a 14-point delta roughly in shooting. That's crazy. Also 120 versus 96.0 rating as well.
Yeah, it is not close. So I think the Celtics, the Boston versus Indiana, I saw an interesting point on this where they said if you looked at Boston's like SRS-ish score for this series, it was like 7, which is a good team. But as comparison, great teams like the Warriors when they were, 73 wins were like plus 10.
Yeah.
And their argument was it was just a consistent series where in a normal. So I guess we're moving on to Boston versus Indiana, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I guess there's not much to say here on this series. No, the only thing I'll say is Oladipo being out didn't hurt. Indiana's offense was really bad, so that was their biggest problem.
Sabonis came off the bench, and we thought he was the best player. Yeah. And then with this young players, same point about like Donovan Mitchell, where you're like, does a young player, you shouldn't expect young players to shoulder the load. The exact same thing Kyle Korver was complimenting Donovan Mitchell arguably for not doing is what we say not to do. So Sabonis came off the bench, so he didn't get as many minutes, and we thought he was the best player on the Pacers this season. And he didn't play particularly well, which could be that an experienced team with, Al Horford and Kyrie Irving, that team knows how to handle the playoffs better than a young player. So we really shouldn't be that upset with him. But the point being, there just wasn't variance, right? And you can expect variance between, no matter how different the margin between two teams in the regular season, you can expect some level of variance. And basically what happened is the Celtics went, we're a slightly better team and we're just going to win every draw. And that's what ended up happening.
Yeah. So for this series, the one thing I was noticing about the Celtics coming into the playoffs is their defense has been really, really good. And that's just the same thing that happened here, basically. So let's get down here.
And by the way, one thing that we've always kind of noted, and your effing Warriors fall into this, and I was bringing back flashbacks back in the day to when the San Antonio Spurs would take down my Nuggets. There is something very tough to deal with when a different team goes into the playoffs in the regular season based on health. But what I mean is if you have a team that has some good players that were banged up during the regular season, and come playoff time they're healthy, they can beat the crap out of the playoffs. And that's what happened last year with the Warriors, right? During the regular season, there was at one point during the regular season where between Curry, Durant, Thompson, and Draymond Green, I think all of them were out for a couple of games, overlapped, and then all of them were out for a decent chunk. But come playoff time, they were all healthy, and the NBA felt their wrath. And the Boston Celtics, we kind of noticed this too, where during the regular season, Kyrie Irving missed time. I think other players did too. If they're healthy in the playoffs, they are a different team they were during the regular season. And even that being said, they were, according to the numbers, a better regular season team than the Pacers. And then, like you noticed, part of the Pacers' numbers were including Victor Oladipo, who they are now missing.
Yeah, so here's what I was trying to look for just now, the shooting for the Pacers, individual players in this series. Most shots for the Pacers, Bojan Bogdanovic, 63 shots, 39.7% field goals. Tyreke Evans, 48 shots, 43.8% field goals. This is not effective, by the way. This is just raw. It's easier for me to read. Darren Collison is third, 45 field goals, 42% shooting. Thaddeus Young, also 42%. It goes on and on and on. You have to go all the way down to their 8th best shooter, Corey Joseph, before you get to 50%, and he's only taken 24 shots. So, yeah, the Pacers just can't score on the Celtics. Their offense is not good enough. That's all I have for this series.
All right, and I'm going to time us, Brian. I only have about 20 more minutes, so we've got to get through a little bit of WNBA and a little Game of Thrones. Apologies if we kind of speed through it, and also apologies. I've obviously been very distracted this show. I don't have AC in my podcast room. It's starting to get summer, so it's getting hot here. And then
these next two series aren't very interesting anyway.
All right, Philadelphia versus Brooklyn. Here's what I'll say. D'Angelo Russell hasn't been playing particularly great. It was bullshit that Jimmy Butler was ejected that game. Clearly Philadelphia is looking good, and Embiid looked really good there. And then this is the only note I want to give on the series, which has nothing to do with the series. There's this brief off the court drama between Jared Dudley and Ben Simmons, where in an interview,
right.
I believe it was in response to a question. So I don't even know if Jared Dudley was that antagonistic. Just said, I think that Ben Simmons from half court is an average player. And then Ben Simmons, the next game, by the way, for what it's worth, the second game he played really well too. So it's kind of stupid that people are giving that. The next game played very well, and people were like, see, Ben Simmons was motivated by Jared Dudley. And I said this was a brilliant political maneuver by Jared Dudley because you've always noted these kind of things, Brian, where you can be in like, no matter what the player does or says, they lose. So it's like the Klay Thompson back in the day calling himself the best shooting guard. You've noted that you just can't beat that interview question. If someone says, who's the best shooting guard? If you don't say myself, people get mad at you for your lack of confidence. And if you say someone else, they get mad at you for not saying.
The only way to win is actually being the best and then saying yes.
And even then, we've seen Kevin Durant, how Kevin Durant has an attitude despite the fact that he is clearly one of the best, if not the best player in the NBA. And people are like, Michael Jordan was humble, which is bullshit for what it's worth. But anyway, so Jared Dudley absolutely won because if Ben Simmons plays terribly, Jared Dudley gets to say, see, I told you. And if he plays great, he says, see, I motivated you. So that happened. That's all I've got to say on that. And
Dre, so it also led to an altercation in the next game where Jared Dudley was kicked out of the game, but also Jimmy Butler was as well. That's a pretty good trade.
That's very, very much like back in the day when Bruce Bowen got Amari Stoudemire. Was it Robert Horry or Bruce Bowen? I forget. But one of those two players got Amari Stoudemire ejected.
All those players were involved. I don't remember exactly how it happened, though.
Okay, Toronto-Orlando. This one just gets interesting, where I think they had a couple of close shots. After game one, Arturo had projected. So, to be fair, here's what Arturo projected. Arturo, American Numbers on Twitter, projected that Toronto was the favorite to win the series, but the most likely outcome of the bins, being one team winning in 4 to the game series going to 7, was the Toronto Raptors losing in 6. So after game one, when Orlando won, it was like, oh, this looks good. But since then, it's gone downhill. And what I'll say, Brian, for anybody that wanted to hate Kawhi Leonard, no, he very vehemently in the last game shut them down because Kyle Lowry hasn't been playing particularly well in these playoffs. And that's been a running theme. Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan have traditionally been the best two players by some combination of advanced stats and mainstream stats, if that makes any sense. So during the Raptors' kind of recent history, those two players have usually been the best two players on the Raptors. And then both of those players kind of disappear in the playoffs. And so that happened. Kyle Lowry seems to have kind of not been his normal self during the playoffs. And Kawhi is like, nope, I don't care. So it looks like it's going to go to Toronto. That's all I've got. And Vucevic is really good. He should go to the Warriors. Well, we keep listing off great underutilized bigs that should go to the Warriors.
Oh, there's so many. This offseason is going to be intolerable for that, Dre. But so Leonard is playing really well. The other one I want to point out is Siakam. Looks great. He's a guy that about a year ago started getting a lot of love, and we were like, that guy's interesting. Well, he really proved it this year, and he is again in the playoffs. The one thing I'll say on Lowry, though, is he is doing what you were saying you should do, which is he's not shooting very well, so he's not taking a lot of shots. He's letting Leonard and Siakam basically take all the shots. So that's something at least, and he's still getting rebounds and assists, and he does have 9 steals. So he's playing okay for Lowry.
Well, that's the interesting point you've made about basketball versus other sports is because you are allowed to pass, the argument of they have poor shooting efficiency because they shoot so much, you go, that is inexcusable because you are allowed to pass. And for instance, to do one more nail on Donovan Mitchell has a poor assist to turnover ratio. So you go, you're not good at any of the offensive skills you need because what you want is a player like James Harden or Steph Curry who can shoot and pass. And so that means if they don't have a good shot, they pass. Or like you're saying with Kyle Lowry, if he's not shooting well, he passes to his teammates. So to that point, Kyle Lowry isn't playing. One of the things he does do well is shoot well, and he's not doing that. Yeah. But the good news is he finally has a team. Unlike DeMar DeRozan, who also seemed to disappear in the playoffs, he now has Kawhi, and Kawhi knows what he's doing. We will see if they regret getting Marc Gasol, because I think Marc Gasol has not looked particularly great.
He's been okay, but clearly not as good as the guy who he's traded for, or guys, I should say, but DeLon Wright as well. But, I can see why Arturo's model liked Orlando a little bit because Orlando is not a very deep team. Like, let's scroll down to them here. Like, they get most of their wins from Vucevic and from DJ Augustine during the regular season, right? Like, you know, Terrence Ross kind of came out of nowhere. Fournier's been okay. Gordon has kind of fallen down a little bit as he's gotten older. Otherwise, they don't have a lot of, you know, really established players. So I can see why maybe loading up on minutes on their top guys in the playoffs is going to help them, especially when it's the Raptors have this super deep roster, right? All these good guys on the bench. But the Raptors stars have just played so well that Orlando has no chance.
Yep. And okay, so we got through all of them. We will see what happens. I really, really hope, Brian, that I haven't spiked the ball too soon, because it's entirely possible that Donovan Mitchell plays great for 4 games in a row.
Yeah.
You know, for what it's worth, the Houston Rockets have blown leads before in the playoffs. I mean, 3-0 would be something.
That's what you do, Dre. You take that punt, you run it all the way up to the 5-yard line, you just spike it right before the end zone.
Exactly.
That's the real way to do it. You know, I'm showing Arturo's updated model from today, and he's basically saying Nuggets Spurs is the only series where it's much to be decided yet. He thinks they're all pretty much done.
One last note I want to give on the playoffs to Arturo, which I've enjoyed, is Arturo made a model of the playoffs pre-playoffs, and then as the playoffs go along, he's gone like, oh, here's what I didn't think of. Oh, here's what I should have said. And that's what I always enjoy, is the Monday morning quarterbacking of people watching the series. One thing he has said is that he did overvalue Utah and Denver, which I could buy, because what the numbers say is that in the regular season, it is brutal to play a back-to-back in Denver or Utah. And because of how,
but you get more rest in the playoffs.
And yeah, because of how the regular season goes, basically walking into Denver on a back-to-back means you're just like supposed to lose no matter how good or bad that Denver team is. And that is usually worth about a +4 win margin in the regular season. And as you were saying, in the playoffs, because there's more rest, both Utah and Denver don't look as good. But I also think there's also some funk. You know, Derek White playing amazing, Donovan Mitchell playing even worse. Like we thought Donovan Mitchell was below average this season. He's playing, him and Jae Crowder are destroying the Jazz, and I don't think you could see that pre-playoff.
Yeah, and to your point, just to spell it out, he has Denver's home court advantage as 21.6%, and Utah's is 18.5%. For all the other teams, it's mostly kind of in the 5 to 7% range, although there are a couple that are 12 and 14, which is Golden State and Boston. Oh, that makes sense. Those are big crowds. But yeah, he gave them a really big advantage for home court.
And he's arguing that might have been too high. All right. I wanted to get this talk on because there's been some WNBA talk going on in the last couple of weeks. I don't know how early or late to it we are. One rough one is Breanna Stewart, star of the WNBA, while playing overseas, I believe ruptured her Achilles and is going to be out for the season. And that has led many, including like Dave Barry, to say the WNBA really needs to get its act together, because what keeps happening is players in the WNBA are playing overseas to make up a bulk of their money, and the WNBA would do better to just ensure that they pay their athletes well enough so that they don't have that conflict of interest. And for what it's worth, in the NBA, like Mark Cuban has gotten upset in the past that he's had international players that want to play in the Olympics and is like, I don't want them to do this. The NBA can say, you're not allowed to play in other leagues while you're in the NBA, and it would behoove the WNBA to be in a similar position. And as Dave Barry has been saying for years now, when we look at the revenue streams the WNBA gets, they play their players a much disproportionate amount to the NBA, and they could do so much better to change that, to just say we're going to play our players 50% of the revenue pile as compared to 20%, which is what his estimate is they are paying now. Now, the good news is, first off, the WNBA has agreed with CBS Sports to get more games, and they already had an ESPN deal. So arguably, this is more revenue. So the WNBA is in a great spot, and they're coming up on a new collective bargaining agreement. So we really hope that works out. The annoying part about these arguments is you get a lot of people that don't know what the fuck they're doing in regards to economics or how leagues working, and saying no one wants to watch the WNBA. By the way, it's really weird if you go out of your way to tell people that are tweeting about the WNBA no one cares, because you do care and you're weird. So fucking stop it.
Well, both people in that exchange are tweeting about it, right? So clearly both of those people care by definition, right?
And then also what I'll say is, What gets frustrating about that is, first off, if you're trying to compare the WNBA to the NBA, the type of standards people are putting the WA on, they can't lose any money, they're not enough draw, etc. It's not the same universe the NBA existed in. The NBA struggled early when it was young and arguably had worse ratings than the WNBA did at the same age. Because while the NBA might have had similar crowd size at the same age, it was much less competitive. As Dave Barry has noted in some of his work, the WNBA gets far less coverage than the NBA gets now or even got back in the day. And that's free, right? Like if ESPN decides to give coverage to a league, that's like free marketing. This is what happened with Donald Trump, by the way, in his election. All of the networks were just like, we're just going to cover this guy. He's not going to pay for ads. We're just going to keep, playing him for free. And that's a huge advantage. So what really frustrates me is a lot of people go, the WNBA is losing money. We can't support it. They should just be a business like the NBA. You go, listen, the NBA has never been like that. And it never was like that. And, 2 weeks ago, we had Chris Ye on the show who talked blitz scaling. And in lots of businesses, it is accepted that you have to invest in your business up front and essentially take a loss before you eventually become stable and make money. The WNBA is a young enough league that if you want it to grow and progress, you have to invest in it. And if you want to view the NBA as its backer, which arguably it is, it should do that. And, the thing that got Dave Barry fired from Forbes is when he noted when they were talking about when they were talking about the G League, they said the G League loses money, but that's okay because it's an investment in future players, which we are completely behind. And he goes, okay, well, if you're viewing the G League as an investment, why the hell aren't you viewing the WNBA as an investment? And they said, shut up, you're fired. So that's all we're saying here. The NBA compared to the WNBA, if we want to treat them the same, the WNBA really should be paying its players better and investing in its future like the NBA was doing when it was 20 to 30 years old. And we are seeing problems with players like Breanna Stewart getting injured, and they should really fix that. So that's all we're saying, and we hope that gets fixed going forward.
Yeah, and this did lead to a lot of great spicy tweets by Professor Barry, such as something to the effect of, I'll subtweet right now, something to the effect of, well, there's two ways to get into economics, either become a professor, get a PhD, and publish a bunch of books, or just say stuff on Twitter. That's the kind of material I like from him. But let me just point something out, how bullshit all this is, Dre. All these arguments about like how much money pro sports leagues are making, like most of that's not public to begin with anyway, right? So let's go back to the last CBA agreements, or maybe it's the one before that. Anyway, some recent NBA CBA agreements. You remember this? The league came out and said, here's this version of our books. 90% of the teams in the league are losing money and all that. We've got to soak the players. Remember that? And then everyone said, well, this is just the way they're portraying their financials, right? It's not really true. So you have to take all that with a grain of salt, I think.
In some regards, it's frustrating how NBA media has basically agreed to just parrot NBA sources. And again, that was what was fascinating about Dave Barry. We see sources. I believe it was Zach Lowe who came out and said, 13 NBA teams are losing money recently. And that's just what the NBA told them. Whereas Dave Barry said, I'm going to look into the numbers and here's what I think. I'm not just going to repeat what the NBA told me. And it is severely messed up. And we know this is true now. This is kind of cool that we have this behind the scene knowledge that the NBA will pressure mainstream publications to change what they are saying without necessarily, they didn't give Dave Barry their books. So that's not how they fixed it. They just said, you didn't listen to us. And Dave Barry said, well, I listened to you, but I published what I said. And if you want to point the factual inaccuracies, go ahead and do that. But that's not what's happening. Yeah. So that is a little frustrating. And it's annoying that NBA teams and NBA front offices have been able to feed this information. And we've had media publications just quote them at their word. It's the same thing about Donald Trump that's so fucking frustrating, is that publications shouldn't just parrot. When he says something, you don't just quote Donald Trump says blah as your headline. That's not doing good
Let's look
news.
At the incentives, though, Dre. Like, Zach Lowe is doing a really great job with all this access he has, not bashing the NBA too much. And he's a great interviewer, great writer and everything. He's great, but obviously it's going to benefit him not to talk too much trash. So I agree with that. And on Trump, it's the same way. So what's the most famous line from Trump from the campaign? It's when he got asked by Katie Tur about something, and he says, Russia, if you're listening, Where are those missing emails from Hillary? Well, so that part of the soundbite is what they play. But then what does he say immediately after that? He says, if you do have the emails, our media will reward you greatly. Trump understands the game very well.
It's frustrating. Sorry to get us down. Okay, Brian, we have 5 minutes to talk Game of Thrones, so I'm just going to make a flippant comment. We're 2 weeks into Game of Thrones. The good news is these have mostly been setup episodes. Essentially, it's gotten all of the major characters to Winterfell. They're about to have a huge battle with the Night King and his army of the dark, including, I think, the Umbers.
Yes.
We're going to see what happens there. I've got a couple theories I'll throw by you, but we have like 5 minutes, so not too much. But here was my joke. So one thing that's been happening a lot, right, is we saw like Jon and Daenerys Targaryen, having fun and flirting on dragons. In this last by the way, full on spoilers, of course, for Game of Thrones. So apologies. I'd say just end the episode now. Full on spoilers for Game of Thrones. We've done all of our basketball talk. So if you're not caught up, now's your time to cut out. I don't view the Jon and Dany thing as a spoiler. I think that was trailers. But, obviously this last episode, we saw Arya and Gendry get it on. We're seeing some Tommen, Jaime. How did I just drop her name? This makes me feel bad. Brienne of Tarth. We've got all that going on. My joke was, and I put this on Twitter today, if the last 6 episodes are just shipping all of the characters we want, the joke when I had to a friend today is, if Asha Greyjoy comes by in a ship and says, hey, Dany, I hear things are going rough with you and Jon. And I think
that's right. They were flirting a few seasons ago.
You guys are on the outs. Why don't I take you on a cruise? And they go to an island together and have a romantic date or whatever. And they want to do that. I would be completely fine with that. And then at the end of the show, you just have like Frasier cards that say, here's what happened at all the battles. You want to make that season 8 for me, and that's how Game of Thrones wrapped up, I would be fine with it.
Bad news, Dre. Episode 3 is going to have the longest battle in the history of TV or movies.
That's what we're looking forward to. Here's some fun theories I've heard, and I just want to throw them out there, Brian, so we can have them out in the ether, and then I'll let you comment. Then I'll let you get the last comment. That'll be our show. The first is, obviously, the crypt is dangerous. I've heard this from Reddit, so I was upset I didn't think about this. But so what's happening is they're at Winterfell has the crypts underneath, and so usually during times of battle, the women and children go hide in the crypts while everybody else goes out and battles. Well, of course, we have an army of the dead that can bring the dead back to life. So you're sending a bunch of people down into the crypt that have a bunch of dead. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, so there's been like hints that there's something like some kind of magical artifact that keeps Winterfell safe that's down from within the crypts. So I think that's what they're hinting at. But I think what you're saying is much more accurate. And
I think Reddit fans had this theory, and I was like, oh, wow, that's... And also, of course, what we saw in this last episode is some major characters like Tyrion, like Samwell Tarly, are getting put down into the crypt. And, there was a little girl that said, I want to fight. And they go, you'll need to protect your brother and sister down in the crypt. So they have obviously foreshadowed there's going to be fighting in the crypt coming up. So that's one.
I'm hoping for. So there's a few things I'm hoping for this season. One of the things I'm hoping for the most is Breaking Bad, the Starks and Daenerys to kind of go bad or go evil. And I think maybe the crypts might have something to do with that for the Starks. Like maybe they have to sacrifice a bunch of people down there to protect, because there's hints that like Craster, who sacrificed the babies to the Nightwalkers, maybe the Starks do something like that too. So yeah, that's what I think about the crypts.
The other one I've heard is, obviously the Night King has a dragon. What if this is a feint? Because one of the fun talking points of this series is that Cersei is back in King's Landing. She didn't send her army north. Ha ha ha! She's betraying them. She's got 20,000 of the what are they called? The
Company.
The Golden Company. Yeah, the Golden Company.
The mercenaries.
She's got one, and then of course I loved how they handled the CGI of elephants. They just had a conversation that there are no elephants, and I was like, brilliant job, CGI department.
That's why that joke was there, right? They're like, we're not going to pay for these elephants.
We're not going to have elephants CGI'd in. Okay, so that's going on. Well, the Night King has a dragon, and as we've seen, dragons can get really far. So the theory is it's a feint. Everybody thinks the Night King's going to be at Winterfell attacking Winterfell, and the Night King's going to attack King's Landing with a dragon, which I think would be really, really cool as well.
Yeah, I think that dragon will be there for sure. So here's what I'm thinking right now, Dre. So there's a school of thought that's like, Game of Thrones actually isn't that crazy of a series where they kill off the main characters all the time. It's really just that Benioff and Weiss, the showrunners, were good at tricking you who the main characters were, right? Like Ned Stark was played by Sean Bean, the only like big time actor, but really he died right away, right? Wasn't a big character, right? So then really we're down to the main characters now, and there's not going to be all these red weddings and, all this Oberyn, dying randomly and all. There's not going to be all these plot twists at the very end, right? And that we have all these, like you said, there's all these cast of characters coming in at the last minute, all these randos, and they're just going to help do the fight. And I just can't get on board with that. I just feel like all these different characters, some of them have to backstab the humans, Dre.
I think what I like about your take is, so first off, from a narrative perspective, I'll give us 3 extra minutes, Brian, but then I really have to go into
Okay.
Okay. So what I'll say is, when I saw a big list of like, who do you think's going to die? Right.
Everyone.
Like Dan, et cetera, whatever. And what I'll say is, you're right. From a narrative perspective, you're able to do what George R. R. Martin did early on, right? You can kill major characters. Ned Stark was obviously supposed to be the hero that, helped find the conspiracy against the king and all this back in the day. You can kill him off because there's places to go. You can kill off Robb Stark right in the middle of his rebellion because there are places that can go. We're at a point now where, as an example, I'll say next episode, you can't kill Jon, you can't kill Dany, you can't kill Bran, you can't kill the Night King, right? Those 4
probably need to last till the end.
They have to live, because if any of those 4 die, you resolve a major conflict that exists, Cersei as well. And then this is an interesting one. One of Tyrion or Jaime has to live. So it's not both, but one. So I'm saying, as you're noting, when we're starting to list off the major characters, there are ones where I say, narratively, if you kill this character, you have no place left to go. And we know that there are 4 more episodes left, 3 after next week. So I think, to your point, there's not that. But there is a fun point that you are making, that something that could be happening, and we've already seen with Cersei, is while this is the end of the world, everybody really should be fighting the Night King. There are still people that are playing the Game of Thrones that are fighting for politics. And that's where it gets amusing, because we have
Sansa Daenerys was the big one, right?
You've got Sansa and Daenerys right now. It's like, what's going to happen between them? But as you noted, we got Theon Greyjoy came back, and that seems suspicious.
I want to talk more about that, but go ahead.
Bran as well. We don't know, he's the three-eyed raven. We don't know what master he serves. You notice the same with Dany. We don't know who she serves. So it's like there's lots of potential for people in this fight to do things, like you're saying, right? You try and take out Dany because you're still trying to politic, even if there's a big battle.
All these individual people just showing up at the last minute's weird. So I'll flesh this out real fast, Ray, because I know you need to go. So why does Jon spill the beans on him being Aegon Targaryen, like literally as their people are showing up? I know he's known as being like the dumbest character in the series, but even for him, that's a little suspicious to me. Maybe he's already pushing back against Daenerys. So we have this kind of really convoluted plan, like Theon and the Ironborn showing up at the very last minute, and they're just going to protect Bran, just all on their own. That is super suspicious to me. Sam and Bran themselves are very suspicious, Dre, because they have this out-of-nowhere speech about what the Night King's motivations are, right? They're just like, oh, he wants to erase history. It seems very rehearsed, very out of nowhere. It could just be a bad scene, but I didn't see a lot of bad scenes in this episode. They're all pretty good, so that seems very suspicious to me. One of the big theories is that Bran is the Night King. So if that's true, they would be duping them with that speech, right? So what I'm hoping for is Bran needs to keep Jaime alive. There's that scene, right? Why don't you out me? Because Bran is the Night King, and Jaime is still loyal to Cersei and will help her backstab Jon and Daenerys somehow, which would aid the Night King. Because remember, Tyrion has that line where he says to Jaime, she's never fooled you. You always knew exactly what she was. That could be foreshadowing Jaime is still loyal to Cersei.
I can't remember, right? At the end of last season, I didn't do what everybody else did and catch up. At the end of last season, it looked like the Mountain was going to kill Jaime, who said he was going to march north. And then he didn't. And we don't know what discussion happened between him and Cersei after the fact. And Jaime in this episode claims that Cersei is pregnant with his, child. So We have no idea what's going on there.
Let me say this about Jamie, Dre. I don't know which way he's going to go in the end, but I think there's no way he knows yet. I think he's going to have to make a decision later in the season. Which
I mean, that's good. That's good storytelling. And what I will say, just one last shout out. I forget who said this on Twitter, but a great point is it was awesome when Jamie Lannister, right? They're like, you did all of this horrible stuff, and he's just like, we were at war, get over it. That was good.
Yeah. Anyway, I love that episode.
Me too.
It was really, really good. One of my favorites.
We'll see if the rest of the season holds up, because I think kind of season 7 had a lot of really, really good moments, but wasn't really coherent. Whereas
bad pacing at the end, right?
I've really enjoyed the first 2 episodes of season 8. So here's seeing how that goes. All right. Well, apologies again for kind of the lopsidedness, the thundering, and all that of this week's show, but hopefully you got your playoff fix. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez, aka Nerd Numbers. This has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. You can catch the recap on channel YouTube, channel Nerd Numbers. And of course, we are on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geek Show. Subscribe, upvote, helps us out. Produced and co-hosted as always by Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Geeks. And here is really, 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 please, Houston, just close it out tonight. Donovan Mitchell can even have a good game, but just get it done. Fair enough. All right.